We often find comfort in the belief that evil is a silent shadow, lurking in the distance, but the reality is far more unsettling. The truly arrogant cannot bear to remain invisible. They crave the recognition of the world for their dark brilliance. What happens when the only thing standing between a predator and total freedom is the one thing they cannot master, their own voice? In September of 1995, the massive printing presses of the Washington Post and the New York Times churn out a sprawling 35,000-word essay. They publish this dense document under the direct threat of further bombings targeting innocent people. Across the country, a woman named Linda Patrick sits at her quiet kitchen table and reads the text printed in the morning paper. The nation searches these pages for the motivations of a faceless phantom, Linda. However, searches for a familiar ghost. Her eyes catch onto a highly specific, archaic phrasing hidden deep within the sprawling paragraphs. A chilling realization washes over her as she recognizes the unmistakable conversational cadence of her husband's isolated brother. The most elusive fugitive in American history maintained absolute flawless silence for 17 years. He left no physical trace, no fingerprints, and no witnesses at his crime scenes yet. In his supreme arrogance, he set his own trap. He gave himself away the exact moment he finally decided to speak. In the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, a pervasive sense of dread settled over American university campuses and corporate mailrooms. Postal workers and administrative assistants handled everyday packages with a newfound heavy caution. A phantom bomber operated across the country, striking without warning and leaving zero forensic evidence behind. He chose his targets with a terrifying randomness, shifting from computer store owners to university professors. The nation knew him only by the acronym, the Federal Bureau of Investigation assigned to his task force. They called him the University and Airline Bomber. Investigators stared at empty crime scenes stripped of all identifying markers. The explosive devices arrived wrapped in meticulously crafted wooden boxes built from scrap materials untraceable to any specific hardware store. He peeled the labels off batteries and cast his own metal components from raw scrap. The sheer absence of evidence became his defining signature. Law enforcement agencies found themselves chasing a ghost who seemed to exist completely outside the modern world. They set up massive task forces, yet they possessed nothing but fragments of shattered wood and twisted metal. While panic gripped the cities, the architect of this terror lived entirely off the grid in the dense, silent wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. 2,000 miles away from his coastal targets, a small, 10-foot by 12-foot wooden cabin sat camouflaged among the towering pine trees outside Lincoln, Montana. The nearest paved road lay miles away down a treacherous dirt path. No electricity hummed in the walls, and no running water softened the harsh mountain living conditions. Here, Theodore Kaczynski cultivated a deep, obsessive resentment against industrialization and modern technology. He spent his days hunting small game, reading by the dim light of homemade candles, and writing furious journals detailing his hatred for the expanding mechanical world. Kaczynski viewed himself as a brilliant savior, the only man capable of seeing the destruction brought by the technological revolution. He believed his superior intellect justified the devastation he planned to inflict on unsuspecting people. He carefully constructed his lethal devices on a small wooden table, ensuring no stray hairs or fingerprints contaminated the mechanisms. The isolation of the Montana mountains provided him the perfect impenetrable shield against any police scrutiny. The vast expanse of untamed forest swallowed his secrets, allowing him to operate in absolute darkness for nearly 2 decades. The true cost of this isolation became devastatingly clear on a cold December morning in 1985. In Sacramento, California, 38-year-old Hugh Scruton arrived at the back entrance of his computer rental store. Hugh was a quiet, fiercely independent man who loved playing golf and possessed a deep passion for the emerging world of personal computers. He poured his life savings into his small business, working long hours to build a future for himself. As Hugh stepped into the paved alleyway behind his shop, he noticed a block of wood resting near the rear tire of his vehicle. The object looked like a harmless piece of discarded lumber, ordinary and entirely out of place. He reached down to move the obstruction out of the driving path. The moment his fingers disturbed the wooden block, a massive blast shattered the quiet morning air. Hugh met a brutal permanent end right there on the cold asphalt behind the store he loved. He became the first person to lose his life to the phantom bomber, leaving his family shattered and demanding answers. His mother would spend the rest of her days pleading for justice, entirely unaware that the man responsible was sitting quietly in a snow-covered cabin thousands of miles away. The agonizing stalemate between the bomber and the authorities broke unexpectedly in the spring of 1995. The Federal Bureau of Investigation mailroom in San Francisco intercepted a heavy, manila envelope addressed directly to the media and prominent academics. Inside lay a typed, 56-page manuscript titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The document contained 35,000 words of dense, meticulously structured philosophical arguments condemning modern technology. This marked the very first time the elusive bomber communicated directly and extensively with the public. For years, he had operated in silence, letting his devastating devices speak for him. Now, he demanded an audience driven by a narcissism that outweighed his legendary caution. He issued a chilling ultimatum to the federal government and the major newspaper syndicates. If they printed his manifesto in full, he promised to cease his campaign of terror. If they refused, he vowed to build another device and send it to an unsuspecting target. The federal agent staring at the type pages realized the criminal had just fundamentally altered the rules of his own game. The ultimatum triggered a fierce, unprecedented debate at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Director and the United States Attorney General faced an impossible moral and tactical dilemma. Giving in to a terrorist demand went against every established protocol in modern law enforcement. Experts argued that publishing the sprawling text would validate the bomber, potentially inspiring copycats to take up the cause. Conversely, refusing the demand meant accepting the inevitable loss of more innocent lives. Behavioral analysts at the Bureau studied the text and noted the intense arrogance bleeding through every sentence. They recognized that the author desperately craved intellectual validation from the society he claimed to despise. The linguistic profilers convinced the directors that the manifesto was not just a threat but a massive tactical vulnerability. They believed the incredibly specific vocabulary and archaic sentence structures would act as a beacon. By broadcasting the text to millions of readers, they hoped someone somewhere would recognize the unique voice of the author. The authorities made the controversial decision to capitulate, betting everything on the chance that the killer's own words would expose him. Before the public release of the manuscript, the massive task force spent agonizing years chasing shadows through a maze of dead ends. Hundreds of federal agents occupied warehouses packed with millions of useless documents and disconnected suspect profiles. The investigative momentum stalled entirely around a single, highly flawed piece of visual evidence generated in the winter of 1987. A witness caught a brief, shadowy glimpse of a man placing a device behind a computer store in Salt Lake City, Utah. A police sketch artist translated this fleeting encounter into the now infamous image of a square-jawed figure wearing a hooded sweatshirt and aviator sunglasses. This drawing immediately became the most recognizable face in American criminal history, plastered across post offices and evening television broadcasts. Yet, this iconic image severely hindered the investigation by forcing agents to look for a phantom who perfectly matched an exaggerated caricature. Thousands of everyday citizens reported sightings of individuals wearing hooded sweatshirts, flooding the hotline with useless information. Agents wasted countless hours interviewing ordinary men whose only offense was wearing winter clothing on a cold afternoon. The rigid adherence to this specific visual profile blinded authorities to any suspect who failed to fit the precise physical mold. As years passed, the trail went entirely cold, leaving the task force commanders staring at bulletin boards filled with crossed-out names. They exhausted massive resources hunting a generic phantom, while the real perpetrator continued his meticulous work hidden deep in the wilderness. The publication of the manifesto in 1995 initially amplified the chaotic nature of the federal investigation. Rather than providing immediate clarity, the sprawling text triggered an absolute avalanche of useless tips from the general public. The task force hotline received over 50,000 calls in the weeks following the appearance of the document in the national papers. Desperate agents drowned in an ocean of paper forced by rigid protocol to log and investigate every single phone call. Ex-wives reported their angry former husbands, and university students pointed the finger at their eccentric philosophy professors. The systemic overwhelm created a dangerous bottleneck in the flow of verified intelligence. Crucial behavioral clues buried within the 56 pages threatened to become lost in the immense pile of false accusations. The legal framework required the task force to prove probable cause before securing search warrants, a standard impossible to meet with anonymous tips. Investigators lacked any physical anchor connecting the typed philosophical arguments to a tangible geographic location or a living suspect. The lack of biological trace evidence on the actual explosive devices compounded their intense frustration. They faced the grim reality that reading the thoughts of the perpetrator brought them no closer to locating his physical hiding place. The federal government realized they had handed a massive platform to a terrorist without gaining any immediate tactical advantage. While federal agents suffocated under the weight of thousands of false leads, Theodore Kaczynski embraced a profound sense of victory. He sat in his freezing snow-covered cabin in the Montana wilderness, completely unaware that his own family held the key to his downfall. The arrival of the national newspapers in the small town of Lincoln confirmed that his grand ultimatum had succeeded perfectly. Kaczynski believed he had fundamentally outsmarted the combined might of the federal government and the entire academic establishment. He recorded his triumphant thoughts in heavily coded journals, documenting his perceived intellectual superiority over the men hunting him. The deep snowpack outside his wooden door provided a perfect physical barrier against the outside world during the harsh mountain winter. He maintained his rigid daily routine, chopping wood for the cast iron stove and studying complex mathematical theorems by candlelight. The profound silence of the forest reinforced his deeply held belief that he remained completely invisible to the authorities. No sirens echoed through the tall pines, and no unfamiliar vehicles dared to travel up his treacherous mountain path. He meticulously planned his next potential steps, completely confident that his 17-year streak of flawless evasion would continue indefinitely. His supreme arrogance prevented him from realizing the immense danger hidden within the archaic vocabulary he so proudly published. The impenetrable shield surrounding the Montana cabin began to fracture not inside a federal building, but inside a quiet residential home. Linda Patrick could not shake the heavy sense of dread that settled in her stomach after reading the essay in the newspaper. She approached her husband, David Kaczynski, and gently suggested a horrifying possibility regarding his estranged brother. David initially rejected the terrifying notion, unable to reconcile the image of a violent criminal with the brilliant older brother he idolized. To prove his wife wrong, David climbed into the dusty attic of his childhood home to retrieve a locked box of old family documents. He spent agonizing days sitting on the floor, reading through dozens of private letters sent by Theodore during the 1970s. As David moved from one handwritten page to the next, His initial denial slowly dissolved into a suffocating, undeniable panic. The letters contained furious rants against the Industrial Revolution and long, academic complaints about the destruction of wild spaces. The tone, the pacing, and the intensely specific philosophical grievances mirrored the published manifesto with terrifying precision. David faced the ultimate moral nightmare, trapped between a fierce loyalty to his flesh and blood and the duty to protect innocent strangers. He knew that taking this stack of faded letters to the authorities would likely result in a federal death sentence for his own brother. The heavy emotional burden forced him to seek professional, discreet guidance before making a move that would destroy his family permanently. Desperate for an objective assessment, David utilized his personal savings to hire a private investigator and a forensic linguist. He handed over the stack of private letters and asked the experts to compare the documents against the published 56-page manuscript. The analysts immediately bypassed the general complaints about technology and focused strictly on the underlying grammatical architecture. They searched for subconscious linguistic fingerprints, the unique conversational habits that a writer cannot hide even when attempting to mask their identity. The profound breakthrough arrived when the forensic linguist isolated a very peculiar, inverted proverb hidden deep within both texts. In the newspaper manuscript, the author criticized modern society by stating they wanted to eat their cake and have it. 2. The vast majority of the American public uses the phrasing, "have your cake and eat it." 2. The private investigator found this exact same archaic inversion written in a letter Theodore mailed to a newspaper in 1971. The linguist identified over a dozen unique structural similarities, confirming the tragic truth with absolute, undeniable certainty. The private investigator prepared a comprehensive, highly confidential dossier detailing these profound linguistic matches. In early 1996, a deeply conflicted David Kaganski handed this explosive file over to a specialized lawyer, who then contacted the federal task force. The authorities finally possessed the golden thread they needed, provided entirely by the sheer arrogance of the author's own words. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical teams gather in a hidden staging area outside Lincoln, Montana. Spring thaw turns the mountain dirt roads into thick, treacherous mud. The target cabin sits isolated among towering lodgepole pines. The distance to the nearest paved highway spans several rugged miles. Agents move through the tree line in absolute silence. They wear heavy protective gear against potential shrapnel. The risk of a hidden perimeter tripwire remains high. The raid must happen with ruthless speed. A single misstep means absolute devastation. The Phantom bomber rests inside the 10-foot by 12-foot wooden structure. He stays oblivious to the approaching federal strike force. The massive government dragnet closes tight around the mountain property. The element of surprise dictates the federal strategy on this freezing April morning. Agents deploy a specific tactical ruse to breach the structure. A local Forest Service ranger approaches the handmade wooden door. The thick timber blocks out the harsh mountain wind. The ranger strikes his fist against the heavy wood. He shouts a fabricated story about a disputed mining claim boundary. Theodore Kaganski unlatches the iron lock. He steps out into the crisp daylight. He wears dirt-stained clothes and a tangled, unkempt beard. Federal agents rush the wooden porch from all sides. They pin the bewildered fugitive to the cold mountain dirt. The Phantom offers zero physical resistance to the arresting officers. Heavy steel handcuffs lock shut around his wrists. The tactical squad secures the immediate perimeter around the cabin. Explosive ordnance technicians step inside the suffocating cramped space. The scent of stale wood smoke permeates the stagnant air. Shadows fill the dim, windowless room. Investigators illuminate the tiny structure with high-powered flashlights. They make a chilling discovery hidden beneath a low wooden cot. A completed live explosive device sits wrapped in brown paper. The weapon waits primed for an unknown recipient. Agents find meticulous journals stacked on raw lumber shelves. These thick notebooks contain thousands of complex coded entries detailing every crime. The investigators locate the ultimate prize resting on a small wooden table. They secure the original handwritten draft of the infamous 56-page manuscript. The arrogant linguistic trap he built for himself snaps shut on his own desk. The capture of the elusive phantom brings profound relief to a terrified nation. Federal prosecutors begin building an impenetrable legal case in Sacramento, California. The physical evidence retrieved from the Montana cabin leaves zero room for reasonable doubt. However, the impending trial introduces a complex psychological battle between the defendant and his own legal team. Public defenders recognize the sheer impossibility of fighting the massive forensic mountain. They prepare a mental health defense strategy to spare their client from the federal death penalty. This legal maneuver enrages Theodore Kahansky beyond measure. His towering narcissism refuses to allow anyone to label his lifelong ideological crusade as a product of mental illness. He views his brutal actions as a brilliant, necessary strike against a corrupt industrial machine. The defendant demands to represent himself to preserve his twisted philosophical legacy. He prefers the prospect of execution over the public dismissal of his prized intellect. The federal judge denies his desperate request to dismiss his legal counsel. The absolute control he wielded over his isolated mountain domain shatters in the sterile federal courtroom. Faced with the total collapse of his grand ideological stage, the fugitive capitulates. In January of 1998, Kaczynski accepts a binding plea agreement to avoid a lethal injection. He pleads guilty to all federal charges related to his 17-year campaign of terror. The families of the victims gather in the Sacramento courthouse to witness the conclusion of the nightmare. They listen as the presiding judge hands down a massive, inescapable sentence. The court mandates 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The man who valued absolute freedom in the wild mountains loses his autonomy for the remainder of his life. Federal marshals transport him to the administrative maximum facility in Florence, Colorado. This grim concrete fortress represents the exact peak of modern security technology he despised. He spends his remaining decades trapped inside a tiny, soundproof cell. The rigid daily routine of federal prison strips away every remnant of his perceived superiority. The grieving families secure the definitive justice stolen from them decades prior. The era of the untraceable postal packages becomes a closed chapter in American history. The concrete walls of the Supermax prison silence the once prolific writer. His heavy isolation mirrors the mountain cabin, yet strips him of all natural beauty and control. Decades slip past while the technological world he tried to destroy advances at lightning speed. His immense ego diminishes as the public consciousness forgets his specific philosophical grievances. In 2021, declining health forces his transfer to a specialized federal medical center in North Carolina. The brilliant, destructive mind degrades under the heavy weight of terminal illness. On June 10, 2023, guards find the 81-year-old unresponsive in his hospital cell. The man who spent a lifetime dealing permanent ruin to innocent strangers meets a quiet, unremarkable end. His legacy serves as a grim testament to the devastating danger of unchecked intellectual arrogance. He constructed a flawless physical shield around himself, only to demolish it with a single publication. While Kaczynski hid in a remote wilderness cabin, other predators adopt a different form of camouflage. Some monsters choose not to flee society, but to embed themselves in the heart of normal suburban life. They build false identities as loving fathers, waiting decades for a single genetic test to shatter their perfect disguise. In the quiet hours of 2009, 41-year-old April Balacio sat in front of a glowing computer screen, typing search terms that made her stomach turn. She searched for unsolved crimes in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, focusing on the year 1980. A lingering dread compelled her to dig into a tragic unsolved case she remembered her father talking about during her childhood. Her father always possessed an uncanny, detailed knowledge of local crimes, masking his terrifying reality with arrogant boasts. April picked up the telephone and dialed a cold case detective, offering a name that investigators had chased shadows to find for nearly 30 years. That single phone call matched the biological trace evidence preserved in an evidence locker, exposing a predator who had spent his entire life hiding in plain sight. Edward Wayne Edwards spent the 1970s building a public persona as an intellectual and a reformed outcast. He published an autobiography in 1972 titled Metamorphosis of a Criminal, participating in television panels and lecturing community groups on the importance of rehabilitation. To the outside world, Edwards embodied a profound redemption story, transforming from a bank robber on the Federal Bureau of Investigation 10 Most Wanted list into a devout family man. He moved his wife and children to different states dozens of times, changing addresses the way other people changed seasonal coats. Inside the walls of their home, Edwards projected absolute authority, demanding strict obedience while creating an environment of perpetual anxiety. He framed these relocations as fresh starts, yet they served a darker logistical purpose, allowing him to evade local law enforcement scrutiny. He wore the mask of a charming handyman and a concerned citizen, a disguise that granted him access to vulnerable communities across the American Midwest. Underneath the rehearsed smile, a terrifying predator fed on a deep pathological need to outsmart authorities and control the narrative. In the late summer of 1980, the rural community of Jefferson County, Wisconsin, operated with an open-door innocence. The landscape featured miles of dense timberland giving way to expansive cornfields, connected by narrow two-lane asphalt roads like Highway F. At the heart of local social life sat the Concord House, a sprawling, rustic dance hall surrounded by a gravel parking lot and thick brush. Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, both 19 years old, represented the vibrant youth of the surrounding area. Tim held a reputation as a diligent worker and a devoted athlete, looking forward to starting a new chapter in life. Kelly radiated a quiet warmth, harboring dreams of settling down and building a family of her own. The couple shared a deep connection, planning their future together with the bright optimism characteristic of young adulthood. They lived simple, honest routines, attending work and spending their weekends enjoying local gatherings with close friends. Neither Tim nor Kelly could perceive the threat lingering in the shadows of their familiar hometown. On the evening of August 9, 1980, the Concord House hosted a lively wedding reception. Music echoed through the wooden beams of the dance hall, spilling out into the humid summer air. Vehicles filled the expansive gravel lot, parked tightly in rows that extended toward the dark perimeter of the surrounding woods. Edward Wayne Edwards worked at the venue as a groundskeeper and handyman, blending without effort into the background while observing the attendees. His position granted him unrestricted movement across the property, a vantage point from which he could study the routines of the local teenagers. Tim and Kelly attended the reception, dancing and celebrating in the company of a large crowd. The atmosphere felt safe, insulated by the presence of neighbors and the familiar routines of a Saturday night. The dense tree line bordering the parking lot provided a stark contrast to the bright lights of the hall, creating a natural blind spot concealed from the main road. As midnight approached, Tim and Kelly stepped out of the warm dance hall and walked toward the gravel parking lot. They intended to drive home, leaving the music and the bright lights of the Concord House behind. Their friends noticed their absence but assumed the young couple had decided to end their night early. The next morning, a harsh reality shattered the quiet Sunday peace when neither Tim nor Kelly appeared at their respective homes. Panic set in among their families, leading to immediate phone calls and a frantic search of the local area. Searchers located Tim's vehicle sitting undisturbed in the Concord House parking lot, the doors locked and the keys missing. A visual inspection of the ground around the car revealed signs of a sudden, chaotic struggle in the loose gravel. Law enforcement officers arrived to secure the perimeter, marking out the distance between the dance hall exit and the isolated spot where the car rested. The vast cornfields and thick woods bordering the highway transformed into a massive grid search as volunteers combed through the underbrush. Weeks of agonizing uncertainty stretched into autumn, eroding the hope of the two families. In late October, hunters walking through a dense section of woods located several miles away from the Concord house noticed an unnatural shape hidden beneath the fallen leaves. Investigators arrived to make a grim discovery identifying the forms of Tim and Kelly concealed in the rural landscape. The physical evidence indicated the young couple had met a terrifying permanent end shortly after their abduction from the dance hall. During the intense initial phases of the search, Edward Wayne Edwards chose a path of bizarre, aggressive visibility. Instead of fading into the background, the handyman walked straight into the local police station to speak with detectives. He offered unsolicited theories about the deceased appearance, claiming he had observed suspicious characters lingering near the venue on the night of the reception. Edwards positioned himself as a helpful, observant citizen, answering questions with rehearsed confidence and a cooperative demeanor. He took profound pleasure in standing face to face with the investigators who were hunting him, an act of supreme arrogance that allowed him to monitor their progress. Following his interviews with the police, Edwards sensed a shift in the local atmosphere. Investigators began taking a closer look at the employees of the Concord house, requiring background checks and basic fingerprinting. The moment authorities requested a formal statement and a deeper dive into his past, Edwards executed his standard protocol. He gathered his wife and children in the middle of the night, packing their belongings into a station wagon with practiced efficiency. The family fled Jefferson County long before the sun rose, abandoning their rented home and the life they had established in Wisconsin. Edwards told his children a fabricated story to justify the sudden escape, relying on his absolute authority to silence any questions. By the time detectives returned to the property to follow up on the peculiar statements made by the handyman, they found an empty house. The trail grew cold, leaving behind an investigative void and two devastated families demanding answers. Edwards vanished back into the vast American highway system, carrying a dark secret that he could never stop talking about. Following the discovery in the autumn woods of 1980, Jefferson County investigators returned to the Concord house parking lot to reconstruct the timeline. Detectives measured the exact distance between the heavy wooden exit doors of the dance hall and the spot where Tim left his vehicle. They collected soil samples, tire tracks, and microscopic fibers, placing them into sterile paper envelopes. At the county morgue, technicians preserved biological material recovered from the clothing Kelly wore that night. Law enforcement possessed crucial physical evidence, yet the forensic science of the era lacked the capability to generate a definitive suspect profile. Detectives conducted hundreds of interviews with local residents, focusing on men who lived within a 10-mile radius of the venue. A rigid protocol forced investigators to prioritize suspects with an established permanent address in Wisconsin. This jurisdictional tunnel vision created a massive blind spot, allowing transient workers to slip through the cracks of the background check system. The name of the former handyman sat buried in a stack of employment records, dismissed because he had crossed state lines. The initial momentum of the investigation ground to a complete halt, leaving the families of Tim and Kelly waiting in agonizing silence. Hundreds of miles away from the quiet Wisconsin cornfields, Edward Wayne Edwards established a new domain of control. He moved his family into a series of isolated rental houses across states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, always selecting properties situated near major interstate highways. This calculated geography allowed for rapid escapes the moment he sensed law enforcement closing in on his activities. Inside these homes, Edwards mandated a rigid military-style routine demanding absolute compliance from his wife and children. He kept the curtains drawn and the doors locked, creating a suffocating atmosphere of perpetual fear. Whenever local television stations broadcast segments on unsolved crimes, Edwards commanded his children to sit in the living room and watch the screen. He dissected the police procedures shown on the news, criticizing the intelligence of the detectives handling the investigations. He took perverse pleasure in driving to local county courthouses, walking to the administrative counters to ask clerks about active dockets. He studied the limitations of the justice system, learning exactly how warrants were filed and how jurisdictions failed to communicate. This arrogant reconscience fueled his belief that he existed far above the reach of ordinary law enforcement. The psychological environment inside the Edwards household deteriorated as the 1980s progressed into the 1990s. Edwards developed a terrifying habit of clipping newspaper articles regarding missing persons and unsolved cold cases, pasting them into expansive scrapbooks. He left these thick leather-bound books spread across the kitchen table, forcing his children to look at the faces of the victims. During evening meals, he dropped unsettling hints about his own history, bragging about possessing intimate knowledge of high-profile investigations. He described specific, unreleased details about crime scenes, attributing his insights to his former life as a famous criminal. He told his daughter April stories about the young couple who vanished from the dance hall in Wisconsin, framing his narrative as a cautionary tale about the dangers of the world. He mocked the authorities in Jefferson County, stating they lacked the intelligence to look in the right places. His family recognized the terrifying undertone of these lectures, trapped between their father and the dark reality he insinuated. The children learned to remain silent during these outbursts, knowing that any question could trigger a volatile, dangerous reaction. Edwards used his own dark secrets as a tool for domestic intimidation, weaponizing the unknown to maintain absolute power over his household. Back in Jefferson County, the turn of the new millennium brought a powerful shift in forensic methodology. Detectives descended into the basement evidence room, pulling the cardboard boxes from the shelves and breaking the decades-old tape. A specialized crime laboratory in Madison received the biological samples collected from Kelly in 1980. Scientists subjected the degraded material to advanced microscopic analysis, working to isolate viable genetic markers from the fabric. They generated a distinct genetic profile, providing the first tangible signature of the predator who haunted the Concord House parking lot. Investigators entered the sequence into the National Federal Database, anticipating a swift match given the extensive criminal history of the perpetrator. A profound systemic failure shattered their expectations. The federal prison system had collected fingerprints and physical descriptions during the incarceration of Edwards in the 1950s and 1960s, long before genetic databases existed. The law at the time did not require paroled federal inmates from previous decades to submit new biological samples. The database returned 0 matches, leaving the detectives staring at a complete genetic sequence with no name attached, while the Wisconsin detectives hit another agonizing barrier. April Balacio built an independent life away from her father. She established a permanent home, creating a safe, stable environment that stood in direct contrast to her chaotic childhood. Yet the memories of the frantic midnight escapes and the dark, boastful lectures refused to fade from her mind. She focused her memories on the specific layout of the rented house in Jefferson County and the sudden urgency her father displayed in August 1980. She recalled how he studied the local television broadcasts about the missing teenagers before orchestrating their abrupt departure. The unsettling pieces of the puzzle began to align, forming a terrifying picture of the man who raised her. April spent her evenings sifting through old newspaper archives at the local library, cross-referencing her father and his past locations with unsolved local crimes. She traced his employment history, matching his stints as a handyman or a groundskeeper to the exact dates of high-profile tragedies. The geographical and chronological overlaps eliminated any possibility of coincidence. The weight of this dark realization pressed down on her, forcing her toward a decision that would alter the course of her entire family. In the quiet hours of a cool evening in 2009, April Balacio sat in the corner of her shadowed study, staring at the glowing monitor of her desktop computer. The walls of her comfortable, secure home offered little protection against the mounting dread pooling in her stomach. She navigated the official web pages of the Jefferson County Sheriff Department, reading the archived summaries of the tragic mystery from August 1980. The geographical coordinates of the Concord House parking lot and the timeline of the sudden disappearance mirrored the midnight escape her father forced upon their family. Decades of listening to his boastful, arrogant lectures about outsmarting the authorities echoed in her mind, transforming from childhood nightmares into a horrifying reality. She picked up the heavy plastic receiver of her landline telephone, her hands trembling as she dialed the main dispatch number for the Wisconsin authorities. A cold case detective answered the call, listening with deep focus as April detailed the exact timeline of her family residing in the rural county. She provided the full legal name of her father, explaining his role as the venue handyman and his suspicious obsession with the ensuing investigation. She described the thick scrapbooks filled with newspaper clippings and the unsettling, unreleased details he recited over the family dinner table. The detective transcribed every word onto a yellow legal pad, recognizing the precise chronological overlap that previous investigators missed. This single, courageous phone call pierced through the administrative blind spots that had protected a predator for 29 years. Armed with a definitive name and a concrete timeline, Jefferson County investigators initiated a coordinated interstate operation to locate the former handyman. Investigators traced the 76-year-old man to a rundown trailer park located on the rural outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky. The surrounding landscape featured rusted chain-link fences and overgrown lots, a stark contrast to the grand public life of the reformed intellectual he once portrayed. Wisconsin authorities requested the assistance of local Kentucky law enforcement to approach the residence and secure a biological sample. Officers arrived at the metal door of the trailer, presenting a court-mandated warrant that compelled the elderly man to provide a simple cheek swab. Technicians sealed the sterile cotton applicator inside a tamper-evident plastic tube, shipping it via priority transport to the specialized crime laboratory in Madison. Forensic scientists extracted the cellular material, feeding the data into their analytical machines to compare it against the profile generated from the 1980 evidence. The automated sequencing process took several days, leaving detectives pacing the floors of their precinct in a state of high anticipation. When the final laboratory report printed out, the results shattered the decades-long mystery surrounding the dance hall tragedy. The genetic markers from the Kentucky trailer mirrored the biological trace evidence recovered from the clothing of the young woman in the autumn woods. The arrogant predator who had boldly walked into the police station to offer unsolicited theories decades prior was bound to the physical reality of his actions. On a humid morning in late July 2009, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled onto the gravel roads of the Kentucky trailer park. Detectives formed a perimeter around the rusted mobile home, blocking all possible exit routes and securing the sparse yard. The physical space offered no avenues for the rapid escapes the man had utilized throughout his transient life across the American Midwest. Officers stepped onto the wooden porch and knocked on the thin metal door, announcing their presence with absolute, unyielding authority. Edward Wayne Edwards opened the door, his physical frame diminished by age, yet his eyes still harbored the cold calculation of a lifelong predator. The arresting officers read him his rights, placing heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists and leading him down the short set of stairs. The man who had spent a lifetime demanding strict obedience and absolute control now found himself at the mercy of the justice system he mocked. Neighbors peered through their vinyl blinds, watching as authorities placed the elderly resident into the back of a secure transport vehicle. The drive to the local processing center marked the definitive end of his decades-long evasion of consequence. Investigators documented his fingerprints and captured his booking photograph, finalizing the administrative records that should have existed long ago. The impenetrable facade of the brilliant reformed mastermind collapsed in the face of undeniable scientific proof. Inside the stark, windowless interrogation rooms of the county jail, the psychological armor of the captured predator fractured. Stripped of his freedom and confronted with irrefutable genetic evidence, Edwards lost the ability to control the dominant narrative. He sat across a metal table from the detectives, leaning forward to engage in the one activity he could never resist. He began to talk, trading his remaining secrets for a final fleeting moment of attention and perceived importance. He offered a full, recorded admission regarding the tragic night at the Concord House in 1980, detailing the exact sequence of events in the gravel parking lot. The scope of his darkness expanded as he confessed to ending the lives of 3 additional individuals across different decades and state lines. The most chilling revelation involved a meticulously planned scheme in 1996, driven by financial greed. Edwards admitted to orchestrating the demise of his own 25-year-old foster son to collect a substantial life insurance payout. He described the calculated betrayal with a terrifying lack of emotion, viewing human life as a mere tool to sustain his selfish desires. Investigators documented every admission, closing the books on multiple open investigations that had haunted various jurisdictions for years. The sheer volume of his admissions painted a devastating portrait of a man who manipulated every system and every relationship to serve his own predatory urges. The ensuing judicial proceedings brought an immense, long-awaited wave of moral justice to the devastated communities. Edward stood inside a formal, wood-paneled courtroom. Facing the families of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, the parents of the young couple delivered powerful impact statements, looking straight at the man who stole the futures of their children. The presiding judge condemned the calculated brutality of the defendant, stripping away the lingering remnants of his public redemption story. The court handed down a definitive sentence of capital punishment, ensuring the elderly man would never again draw breath as a free citizen. Edwards was transferred to a maximum security penitentiary to await his fate on death row, confined to a tiny concrete cell. The justice system did not have the opportunity to execute the sentence, as his failing health intervened a short time later. On April 7, 2011, Edward Wayne Edwards perished of natural causes within the secure walls of the prison hospital. His ultimate downfall materialized not through a dramatic manhunt, but through his own pathological arrogance and his uncontrollable need to boast. April Balesio carried the immense weight of her decision, finding peace in the knowledge that her courage shielded society from a monster. Yet, he was not the only public figure undone by a desperate need to insert himself into an active investigation. Halfway across the world, another arrogant individual built a respected career reporting on a string of local tragedies hiding in plain sight. This trusted journalist published an article containing exact unreleased details about telephone cables, leaving local police staring at the very words he wrote. In the year 2008, a respected crime reporter publishes a gripping article about a serial predator targeting elderly women in the town of Kosivo. Local police officers freeze when they read the morning edition. The journalist has just detailed the exact type of telephone cable used to bind the victims. That specific detail remained hidden from the public, resting only inside the locked files of the lead detectives. Nestled deep within a valley in western Macedonia lies the municipality of Kisevo. Looming mountains and dense pine forests encircle the small town, isolating it from the bustling capital. Sodium streetlights cast a dim amber glow over cracked cobblestone roads and faded concrete apartment blocks. By the early 2000s, Kisevo operated as a quiet, close-knit community where neighbors knew every face. The local economy had slowed, leaving behind a population composed largely of retirees. Elderly women formed the backbone of this aging community. They spent their days sweeping front porches, tending to small vegetable gardens, and walking along the narrow dirt paths to the central market. Trust formed the foundation of their daily routines. Residents often left their wooden front doors unlocked while stepping out to speak with neighbors over low cinder block fences. An overwhelming sense of security blanketed the valley, leaving the vulnerable population unprepared for the darkness looming just out of sight. Vlado Tanitsky navigated these very streets as a respected, mild-mannered local figure. He built a 20-year career working as a dedicated correspondent for two prominent national newspapers. Residents recognized him as a quiet intellectual who always carried a worn notebook and a heavy camera. Tanitsky lived a solitary life in a modest brick house on a quiet residential street. He had separated from his wife and lived alone, following a rigid, unremarkable daily routine. Each morning, he walked to the local cafe, ordered a black coffee, and read through the daily news reports. His quiet demeanor disarmed people, making him an effective interviewer who could extract intimate stories from grieving families. He knew the precise layout of Kisevo, understanding which alleyways lacked streetlights and which dirt roads remained deserted after dusk. Locals viewed him as a pillar of truth, a man dedicated to exposing corruption and bringing clarity to confusing events. He wore the mask of an empathetic professional, hiding the immense psychological turbulence churning beneath his calm exterior. Beneath his professional facade, Tanitsky harbored a profound resentment rooted in his upbringing. His late mother had worked as a cleaner, a stern woman who criticized her son and dictated the course of his early life. They shared a tense, bitter relationship that left deep, unresolved psychological scars long after her passing. The elderly women of Kisevo shared a striking demographic and physical resemblance to his mother. They worked identical blue-collar jobs, styled their graying hair in the same short fashion, and shared the same strict generational values. Tanitsky watched these women navigate their twilight years with a quiet, seething fixation. He understood their vulnerabilities, noting how they trusted men in positions of authority. The community viewed the local press as a vital, trustworthy institution, granting Tanitsky unrestricted access to people's homes and private lives. No one suspected that the polite man taking notes on their front porches harbored a fractured mind. The town saw a dedicated reporter, oblivious to the silent predator, mapping out his hunting grounds. From the year 2005 through 2008, an unprecedented wave of terror shattered the quiet illusion of Kisevo. Mitra Simonoska, a 64-year-old woman who earned a meager living as a cleaner, vanished without a trace after a routine trip to the local market. Her sudden disappearance left her family frantic, prompting desperate searches through the dense woodland borders surrounding the municipality. Weeks later, authorities made a grim discovery at an illegal dumping site located on the rural outskirts of the valley. Investigators found her remains concealed inside dark, plastic garbage bags bound with a thick telephone cord. The dumping ground sat miles away from the town center, accessible only via a rugged, unpaved dirt road hidden by heavy underbrush. A suffocating silence fell over the community as news of the discovery broke. Soon after, 56-year-old Lovatica Lioska disappeared from her neighborhood under identical circumstances. Panic replaced the old community trust, forcing residents to lock their wooden doors and pull their curtains tight. The town realized that a methodical, calculating individual was hunting within their borders. Vlado Taniski seized the opportunity to cover the escalating crisis for his national newspaper. He arrived at the homes of the missing women, presenting himself as a compassionate ally to the terrified families. He sat in their living rooms, drinking their tea and listening to their deepest fears. Relatives poured their hearts out to him, sharing intimate details about the victims' final known movements and daily habits. Taniski took meticulous notes, nodding in sympathy while studying the emotional devastation he had caused. He used his press credentials to bypass police cordons, lingering near the dumping sites and observing the crime scene investigators at work. He began publishing front-page exclusives, writing with a chilling authoritative voice about the Kisivo monster. His articles dominated the newsstands, gripping the nation with their vivid descriptions of the terror paralyzing the small town. The families of the victims trusted him, viewing his journalism as their absolute best hope for keeping the cases in the public eye. Taniski inserted himself into the center of the tragedy, acting as the primary narrator of a nightmare he engineered. The psychological manipulation deepened as Taniski became a fixture in the ongoing police investigation. He questioned local detectives, pressing them for updates and asking pointed questions about forensic evidence. The authorities, accustomed to his persistent reporting, viewed his inquiries as the standard actions of a dedicated local journalist. In 2008, a third woman, 65-year-old Zivana Tobamkoska, went missing, sending a final shockwave of dread through the remaining elderly population. Tomokoska shared the exact same physical profile and occupation as the previous victims, confirming a rigid, unyielding pattern. Once again, Taniski was the first reporter on the scene, interviewing her distraught son and documenting the family's grief in real time. He watched the authorities scramble, recording their sheer inability to find a single viable suspect or witness. His writing grew bold, criticizing the police for their incompetence and highlighting their failure to protect the vulnerable women of Kisivo. By positioning himself as a champion of justice, he diverted all suspicion away from his own quiet home. The town praised his relentless pursuit of the truth, unaware that the man demanding answers was the architect of their suffering. The investigation into the disappearance of Mitra Simeonoska began with a formidable geographic disadvantage. The rugged topography surrounding Kisivo consisted of steep ravines, dense pine cantopes, and rough logging trails. Detectives established a perimeter around the rural dumping site, measuring the distance from the bustling town center to the isolated wasteland. Over 3 miles of jagged dirt roads separated the victim from the safety of her community. Crime scene technicians combed the surrounding brush for tire treads or discarded belongings. Their efforts yielded 0 actionable leads, as the hard, sun-baked clay refused to hold distinct impressions. Forensics teams examined the heavy plastic bags concealing the remains. The exposure to harsh elements degraded much of the potential biological trace evidence. Medical examiners determined the victim met a brutal, permanent end through severe asphyxiation. A thick, distinctive telephone cord remained coiled around the remains, serving as the signature of a methodical predator. Investigators searched local hardware stores and supply shops, hoping to track the purchase of the heavy cables. This logistical inquiry collapsed upon inception, as the specific wire belonged to a standard common commercial type, desperate to generate leads. Kisivo law enforcement initiated a massive canvassing operation across the valley. Detectives knocked on hundreds of wooden doors, interviewing neighbors and mapping out the victims' daily walking routes. The sheer lack of modern surveillance infrastructure crippled their progress. Not a single closed-circuit camera pointed toward the dirt paths and narrow alleyways where the victim traveled. Investigators developed an initial working theory suggesting a transient laborer or a violent drifter committed the act. They detained and questioned dozens of local men with prior criminal records for theft and assault. Every interrogation resulted in rock-solid alibis, forcing authorities to release the suspects without charges. A terrifying realization took hold among the lead detectives analyzing the timeline. The absence of forced entry at the victims' residences indicated that the targeted women chose to open their doors to the perpetrator. This psychological dynamic suggested the predator possessed an authoritative, trustworthy local reputation. Despite understanding this behavioral profile, the police remained blind to the respected journalist standing inside their own precinct. The investigation ground to a complete halt, creating a prolonged, agonizing dead end for the grieving families. In the empty spaces between the official police searches, Vlado Taniski escalated his psychological campaign against the town. He embedded himself within the very fabric of the police inquiry, utilizing his press credentials to access restricted information. Taniski attended every official police briefing, sitting in the front row with his worn notebook resting on his lap. He engaged the lead detectives in deep conversations, probing them for details regarding their exact suspects and forensic strategies. The officers answered his questions without hesitation, relying on his national newspaper columns to request public assistance. He then traveled straight from the police station to the homes of the bereaved families. Relatives welcomed him into their living rooms, pouring him coffee while discussing the agonizing lack of investigative progress. Taniski offered them a comforting shoulder, validating their frustration with the slow-moving justice system. He weaponized their private grief, turning their tearful testimonies into sensationalized front-page stories. His articles struck a tone of righteous anger, demanding that local authorities step up their patrols to protect the vulnerable elderly. The community rallied behind his printed words, viewing him as a brave advocate demanding answers from an incompetent police force. The grim cycle repeated itself in the year 2007 when 56-year-old Lovika Likoska vanished from her familiar routine. Law enforcement mobilized immense resources, terrified that the dormant predator had resumed his hunting pattern. Search parties scoured the dense woodlands and rocky embankments bordering the Kosovo municipal limits. Search operations stretched across 3 grueling weeks until civilian volunteers located her remains at another illegal garbage dump. The crime scene mirrored the previous horror with absolute terrifying precision. The perpetrator utilized the exact same dark plastic bags and the identical method of using telephone cables for binding. Authorities officially classified the perpetrator as a serial offender, sending a paralyzing wave of dread through the quiet valley. Elderly women ceased walking to the local market alone, relying on younger male relatives for protection. Taniski responded to this second tragedy by increasing his publication frequency. He spent hours analyzing the geographical distance between the 2 remote dumping sites. His columns described the intricate planning required to transport the remains without triggering suspicion. He taunted the invisible boundaries of the investigation, pushing his published details close to classified police knowledge. The final descent into absolute terror occurred in the year 2008 with the disappearance of Zivana Tablakoska. She vanished near her home, plunging her frantic son into the same bureaucratic nightmare endured by the previous families. Taniski arrived at the Tupumkoska residence mere hours after the initial police report. He sat across from the distraught son, documenting the physical description of the missing 65-year-old woman. The discovery of her remains short days later confirmed the absolute worst fears of the National Police Force. Detectives from the capital city of Spakuk descended upon Kosovo, forming a specialized task force to hunt the phantom predator. These outside investigators brought advanced forensic capabilities, initiating a massive campaign to collect biological samples from local men. Tedeschi observed this massive mobilization with an overwhelming sense of intellectual arrogance. He rushed back to his modest brick house and drafted his most comprehensive, detailed article to date. He bypassed his usual editors, insisting that the breaking story go straight to the printing press. The text outlined the exact brand and color of the telephone cables used to restrict the victims. He believed his status as an untouchable journalist shielded him from the scrutiny of the incoming Capitol detectives. The task force operated out of a cramped, smoke-filled briefing room inside the Kosivo Municipal Police Station. Fluorescent bulbs hummed a steady, maddening rhythm from the ceiling. Detectives from the Capitol reviewed the morning edition of the prominent national newspaper. Their eyes locked onto the second column of the front page exclusive. The text described a specific, thick, insulated telecommunications cable. It detailed the exact knot structures used to restrict the victims. The small room fell silent. A clutching realization hit the seasoned investigators. Law enforcement withheld this classified forensic data from the press. Local supply shops lacked this exact industrial cord in their inventory. The perpetrator and the lead medical examiners were the sole possessors of this grim knowledge. The celebrated local journalist uncovered no departmental leak. He documented his own atrocious acts for the entire country to read. Armed task force members departed the station and navigated the narrow cobblestone streets toward the quiet residential district. They arrived at the modest brick home of Vlado Tedeschi as the late afternoon shadows stretched across the pavement. Officers flanked the wooden front door. They knocked with heavy, authoritative strikes. The mild-mannered reporter answered the door, wearing his usual calm, unassuming expression. Detectives escorted him back to the precinct for a formal high-stakes interrogation. The atmosphere inside the windowless questioning room remained tense. Investigators placed the printed newspaper article on the cold metal table. They demanded to know his exact source for the classified cable details. Tedeschi sat motionless. He failed to provide a single logical explanation for his intimate knowledge of the restricted crime scenes. His arrogant, calculated silence shattered his lifelong disguise. The Capitol detectives required more than circumstantial journalistic evidence. They executed a comprehensive search warrant at his isolated residence. Technicians scoured the property for physical links to the missing women. Authorities forced Tedeschi to submit a biological sample for genetic testing. Forensic scientists transported the swabs to the central laboratory in the city of Spuk. They extracted his genetic profile and compared it against the trace biological material recovered from the dark plastic bags. The sophisticated machinery generated a flawless, undeniable match. The scientific results eliminated any mathematical possibility of a coincidence. The biological data linked the respected writer to the violent ends of the vulnerable women he profiled. The very man who comforted the grieving families was the monster who caused their endless sorrow. His desperate need for public recognition destroyed his untouchable facade. On June 20th, 2008, authorities arrested Vlado Tedeschi. Prosecutors charged him with 2 counts of extreme violence, citing the tragic fates of Mitrosim Sinoska and Zivana Dabapakoska. Law enforcement agencies began preparing an identical indictment for the loss of Levika Likoska. The staggering news devastated the tight-knit municipality of Kosivo. Elderly residents locked their doors, horrified to learn the trusted face of the local press harbored such profound darkness. The victims' families suffered a secondary, agonizing psychological trauma. They realized they had welcomed their greatest nightmare into their living rooms. These grieving relatives had shared coffee and tears with the very architect of their destruction. A massive media scandal erupted across the entire nation. Journalists scrambled to distance themselves from their disgraced former colleague. The Macedonian justice system prepared for the trial of the century. The anticipated public trial would lack a courtroom conclusion. Authorities transferred Tedeschi to a high-security detention facility located in the northern city of Tetovo. Guards placed him inside a shared cell awaiting his formal arraignment. The rigid protocols of the prison system failed to anticipate his final, desperate maneuver. Mere days into his incarceration, guards made a grim discovery during a routine morning inspection. Taniski lay lifeless on the cold concrete floor. He had drowned himself in a shallow plastic bucket of water left for cleaning. Medical examiners confirmed asphyxiation by drowning, ruling the event a deliberate act of self-destruction. This absurd, preventable failure by the detention staff robbed the grieving families of their day in court. He chose a cowardly, permanent exit rather than facing the immense consequences of his actions. The bizarre nature of his final act closed the book on the terror of Kisivo. The community of Kisivo began the grueling process of healing from the betrayal. The victims left behind a legacy of profound caution, altering the trusting nature of the valley. Vlado Tenetsky thought his dual identity would remain invisible to the world. His overwhelming intellectual arrogance forced him to speak, turning his own printed words into his ultimate downfall. He proved that the most dangerous predators shun the shadows to stand beside us in the blinding light of day. Unmasking a criminal requires a singular fatal mistake where their inflated ego overrides their instinct for self-preservation. A predator can expose their true nature through a typed newspaper column. Another damning confession can arrive through the careless whisper of a wealthy real estate scion. When a prominent heir ignores a live microphone, a private moment of absolute truth shatters decades of constructed lies. The year is 2015. A billionaire real estate heir steps away from a documentary film interview and walks into a small, echoing hotel bathroom. He is alone. He stares into the mirror, unaware that the small microphone clipped to his shirt is still recording every single sound. The heavy wooden door isolates him from the production crew in the next room. He leans over the sink, his voice dropping to a gravelly, private whisper. He mutters a sequence of words that will echo through the halls of justice for eternity. What the hell did I do? Killed them all. Of course, the audio cuts to an absolute chilling silence. The skyline of Manhattan in the 1970s stood as a towering monument to immense wealth and uncompromising power. Countless steel and glass structures dominating this skyline belonged to the Durst Organization, a formidable real estate empire managed by a single family. Robert Durst was the eldest son of this dynasty, born into an existence of unimaginable privilege and endless financial safety nets. He grew up walking the polished marble floors of executive boardrooms and residing in sprawling penthouse suites high above the city streets. Yet beneath the tailored suits and the staggering inheritance lay an erratic and calculating mind. He possessed a terrifying sense of entitlement, moving through the world with the absolute conviction that rules applied only to the lower classes. A team of high-priced defense attorneys stood ready to construct an impenetrable legal fortress around him at the slightest hint of trouble. This immense wealth shielded him from scrutiny and provided a flawless camouflage for his darker impulses. He learned early in life that money could erase mistakes, silence critics, and command blind obedience from those around him. The towering skyscrapers of his family empire cast a long shadow, concealing a man who believed his intellect elevated him above the laws of ordinary men. Kathleen McCormack inhabited a starkly different reality before she crossed paths with the billionaire heir. She was an intelligent, vibrant young woman from a modest, hard-working family who valued education and compassion. She spent her days working as a dental hygienist, saving every dollar with the ultimate dream of attending medical school and becoming a pediatrician. Her friends described her as a radiant presence, someone who filled a room with genuine warmth and infectious optimism. She married Robert in 1973, moving from her grounded world into a staggering environment of private jets and endless socialite galas. The couple divided their time between a lavish Manhattan apartment on Riverside Drive and a secluded stone cottage nestled in the quiet, wooded enclave of South Salem, New York. The South Salem property sat at the end of a winding, isolated road surrounded by dense trees that blocked the house from the view of passing cars. This isolation, initially intended as a peaceful retreat, eventually transformed into a profound geographical trap for Kathleen. As the years progressed, she realized her husband possessed an intense desire to control every aspect of her existence. She refused to remain a silent trophy wife and pursued her medical degree, taking the commuter train into the Bronx every day. Her independence enraged a man who demanded absolute submission, creating a suffocating environment within the walls of their remote country home. The winter of 1982 brought a harsh, biting chill to the dense woods of Westchester County. On the evening of January 31st, Kathleen attended a small gathering at a friend's house in Connecticut before driving back to the desolate South Salem cottage. She appeared visibly distressed that night, wearing red sweatpants and a dark jacket, telling her friends she feared what her husband might do to her. This quiet Sunday evening marked the final confirmed moment anyone besides Robert ever saw Kathleen alive. The following days unfolded with a bizarre sequence of delayed reactions and disjointed stories from the real estate heir. He waited several days before walking into a Manhattan police precinct to report his young wife missing. He presented investigators with a convoluted timeline, claiming he placed her on a commuter train to New York City that Sunday night and later spoke to her on the telephone. The legal system faltered, treating the influential billionaire with a staggering level of deference rather than standard investigative scrutiny. Because there was no physical evidence and no grim discovery, the institutional machinery of justice ground to a halt, Kathleen vanished into the freezing winter air, her medical career stolen from her, while her husband retreated behind an army of expensive lawyers. 18 years passed with the tragic disappearance of Kathleen gathering dust in the cold case archives of New York law enforcement. In late 1999, an investigative journalist and a renewed push from state police prompted authorities to quietly reopen the frozen case files. Detectives turned their attention toward a woman named Susan Berman, a prominent writer living on the opposite side of the country. Susan was a vibrant, fiercely loyal individual who had served as the closest confidant and primary public defender of the real estate heir for decades. She possessed a deep, intricate knowledge of his life, having managed his public relations and shielded him from the press during the chaotic weeks following Kathleen's disappearance. Investigators suspected that Susan held the final puzzle pieces required to pierce the veil of secrecy surrounding the events of 1982. The New York authorities contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to arrange a formal interview with Susan, hoping to finally extract the truth. News of the reopened investigation trickled into the media, sending a silent shockwave through the elite circles of the Durst Empire. Susan reached out to her lifelong friend, expressing a need to discuss the impending police interview and the mounting pressure from detectives. She possessed unwavering trust in her wealthy companion, wholly unaware that this very loyalty had placed a massive invisible target squarely on her back. The machinery of justice was slowly creeping toward an answer, but a calculated predator moved much faster to silence the only voice that could dismantle his freedom. The geography of Susan Berman's life centered around a small, rustic rental home located in the winding, steep hills of Benedict Canyon in Los Angeles. The resident sat isolated behind dense foliage, bordered by narrow canyon roads that wound tightly through the upscale neighborhood just north of Beverly Hills. It was a quiet, secluded space where Susan spent her days working on manuscripts and caring for her beloved wire fox terriers. On the morning of Christmas Eve in the year 2000, neighbors noticed one of Susan's dogs running loose along the dangerous hillside street. A neighbor returned the dog, finding the back door of Susan's home swinging wide open in the crisp December breeze. The interior of the house sat cloaked in an unsettling silence, devoid of the usual sounds of typing or television chatter. Police officers arrived shortly after, stepping cautiously through the threshold and navigating the cluttered hallways of the Bohemian residence. They moved toward a bedroom situated at the rear of the structure, where the atmosphere grew instantly heavy with dread. They found the brilliant writer lying lifeless on the wooden floor, her future permanently stolen by a single catastrophic injury to the back of her head. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered glass, and no evidence of a robbery, as her valuables remained untouched. The scene painted a chilling picture of absolute betrayal, indicating she had willingly allowed her attacker inside, turning her back on someone she trusted with her life. The investigation into this targeted elimination took a bizarre turn before detectives even fully processed the Canyon crime scene. A peculiar piece of mail arrived at the Beverly Hills Police Department, addressed specifically to the authorities with block-style, handwritten letters. The envelope contained a solitary, folded piece of paper bearing only a few precise words written in the same rigid block handwriting. The paper contained the exact address of Susan Berman's residence, followed by a single chilling directive, the word cadaver. The envelope carried a postmark dated December 20th, the year 2000, proving it was mailed on the exact day Susan met her sudden, permanent end. A glaring error stared back at the baffled investigators examining the front of the envelope. The author had misspelled the city name, writing Beverly Hills with an extra, unnecessary letter E. This rare spelling mistake transformed a simple anonymous tip into a massive psychological clue for law enforcement. The sender possessed an overwhelming sense of arrogance, believing they could mock the police by orchestrating the discovery of the victim without ever facing consequences. This anonymous messenger wanted the authorities to find the scene, directing the narrative from the shadows with supreme confidence. Detectives recognized that this piece of paper, with its distinct block lettering and unique misspelling, was a fatal error waiting to be exploited. The Los Angeles investigation into the Canyon tragedy immediately faced an immense forensic hurdle. Detectives possessed the anonymous handwritten envelope, but physical evidence linking the billionaire heir to the scene remained entirely non-existent. Fearing the mounting pressure from both coastlines, the real estate scion executed a calculated escape into the shadows. He traveled deep into the humid coastal expanse of southeastern Texas, settling in the port city of Galveston. The geography of his new existence centered around a dilapidated, low-rent boarding house located on Avenue K. This structure stood as a stark contrast to his Manhattan penthouses, featuring peeling paint, humid corridors, and a transient population seeking anonymity. The fugitive adopted an astonishing psychological camouflage to evade detection. He disguised himself as a mute woman, adopting the fictitious identity of Dorothy Sinner to secure the cramped apartment. He wore a heavy wig, applied cheap cosmetics, and communicated strictly through written notes to maintain the elaborate charade. This bizarre performance demonstrated a staggering level of arrogance, as he believed he could manipulate reality itself. He moved quietly through the sweltering coastal streets, observing the world from behind a fabricated persona. However, the cramped living conditions of the Avenue K residence introduced a volatile new element into his isolated life. The boarding house architecture forced its residents into uncomfortable proximity, separated only by thin, poorly insulated walls. Across the narrow hallway from the disguised billionaire lived an elderly, irritable man named Morris Black. Morris possessed a notoriously abrasive personality, frequently clashing with neighbors and landlords alike. The exact nature of the relationship between the wealthy fugitive and the combative tenant evolved into a tense, unpredictable dynamic. In late September of the year 2001, this mounting friction culminated in a catastrophic confrontation inside the small apartment. The specific details of that enclosed struggle remain forever locked away, known only to the survivor. The elderly neighbor met a violent permanent end upon the worn floorboards of the Galveston rental. Faced with a fresh catastrophe, the predator engaged in a methodical, horrific process to erase the evidence of his actions. He acquired a series of cutting implements and systematically dismantled the victim into separate fragments. He placed these fragments into thick, heavy-duty trash bags, sealing them tightly against the sweltering Texas heat. The perpetrator then transported this grim cargo to the nearby shores of Galveston Bay, intending to let the ocean swallow his secrets. He cast the dark bags into the murky, shallow waters, trusting the tides to carry away his latest mistake. The waters of Galveston Bay refused to keep the dark secret submerged for very long. A young boy fishing near the rocky shoreline noticed the strange bags floating close to the surface and alerted authorities. Local police retrieved the heavy plastic containers, opening them to reveal a horrifying puzzle that shocked the small coastal department. Detectives immediately faced a monumental forensic challenge. The perpetrator had deliberately withheld the victim's head, stripping investigators of dental records and crucial trauma evidence. Despite this calculated removal, the criminal made a staggering, careless error. Investigators searched through the bags and discovered a discarded hardware store receipt bearing a very specific customer name. This mundane piece of paper led detectives directly to the dilapidated boarding house on Avenue K. Officers breached the suspect's apartment, uncovering a chaotic scene marred by severe physical damage and lingering biological evidence. Law enforcement waited patiently in the humid corridors, apprehending the disguised heir upon his return to the residence. The Texas authorities believed they had finally secured a highly dangerous fugitive, placing him behind bars with a massive bond. However, the immense power of unlimited wealth instantly shattered their expectations. Within hours, the suspect effortlessly produced the $250,000 required for bail, walking right out the front doors of the precinct and vanishing into the wind once more. The intense manhunt spanned across multiple states, concluding only when the billionaire committed an absurd, inexplicable crime. Police apprehended him inside a Pennsylvania supermarket for stealing a chicken sandwich, despite possessing tens of thousands of dollars in cash inside his rental car. Extradited back to a Texas courtroom, the defendant faced a high-stakes trial that would expose a profound loophole in the justice system. He abandoned the mute disguise and assembled a formidable team of highly paid defense attorneys. These legal architects crafted a daring narrative, framing the fatal encounter as a tragic consequence of self-defense. They argued that Morris Black had illegally entered the apartment and grabbed a weapon, resulting in an accidental discharge during a desperate physical struggle. The missing head created an insurmountable forensic void for the prosecution. Without that crucial piece of anatomy, the medical examiner could not definitively prove the projectile's trajectory or disprove the story of a random struggle. The defense successfully manipulated this lack of physical evidence, shifting the focus onto the chaotic environment of the boarding house rather than the systematic dismantling of the victim. The jury, bound by strict reasonable doubt instructions, accepted the narrative of self-defense for the initial altercation, in a verdict that infuriated law enforcement across 3 states. The wealthy scion was acquitted of the primary charges. The legal machinery failed completely, allowing a man who admitted to dismantling his neighbor to walk out of the courthouse as a free citizen. Over the next decade, the untouchable heir resumed his life of extreme privilege, moving between luxury properties while the families of his victims watched in agonizing disbelief. Cold case detectives in New York and Los Angeles refused to let the investigations expire. These relentless investigators spent years mapping out obscure financial records, cross-referencing flight logs, and analyzing phone records from the late 1990s. They documented his precise movements during the weeks surrounding the Canyon tragedy, slowly building a circumstantial web that lacked only a definitive confession. During these quiet years, the aging billionaire grew consumed by a staggering sense of pathological narcissism. He viewed his previous legal victories as absolute proof of his supreme, unmatched intelligence. This boundless ego compelled him to initiate contact with a team of documentary filmmakers who were researching his life. The production crew secured a pristine, brightly lit studio space in New York, setting up multiple high-definition cameras and sensitive audio equipment. The geography of the interview room featured stark white walls and a simple wooden table, designed to strip away any environmental distractions. The wealthy Shazian sat confidently beneath the glaring lights, ready to dictate his official narrative to the world. He believed entirely in his ability to charm the interviewers and outmaneuver any difficult questions they might present. He failed to realize that the investigative journalists had quietly obtained access to the darkest corners of his past, preparing a psychological trap he could never anticipate. The architecture of the final interview space featured a wide-open room dominated by a central wooden table and surrounded by heavy production equipment. Behind the primary seating area, a narrow hallway extended 30 feet backward, terminating at a small private restroom with a heavy oak door. The billionaire sat at the center of this fabricated stage, confident in his ability to deceive the cameras one last time. The lead filmmaker reached beneath the table and produced 2 separate pieces of paper encased in clear protective sleeves. He placed the first document onto the smooth wooden surface, revealing a letter the wealthy heir had mailed to Susan Berman in the year 1999. He then laid the second document directly beside the first, exposing the anonymous cadaver note sent to the Beverly Hills Police in the year 2000. The camera lenses zoomed in on the terrifying, undeniable reality resting upon the table. The block-style handwriting on both envelopes matched with absolute mechanical precision. Every rigid angle of the letters, every uniquely formed consonant, mirrored the other with flawless accuracy. Furthermore, the fatal arrogant mistake stared back at the stunned billionaire as both envelopes featured the exact same misspelling of the city name, adding an unnecessary letter E to create the word Beverley. The impenetrable fortress of wealth and legal manipulation collapsed in an instant under the weight of this single, undeniable forensic truth. The arrogant predator stared down at the dual pieces of evidence, his carefully constructed facade shattering in real time. A profound, suffocating silence filled the expansive studio as he processed the monumental failure of his own intellect. His eyes darted between the 2 misspelled words, searching for a plausible explanation that did not exist. He attempted to produce a physical symptom of distress, burping, and recoiling from the table, but the inescapable reality remained pinned to the wooden surface. The immense psychological weight of 3 decades of deception finally crushed his arrogant composure. He asked the production crew to pause the recording, seeking immediate refuge from the glaring studio lights. The billionaire stood from his chair, forgetting that a highly sensitive wireless microphone remained clipped to his lapel. He walked down the 30-foot hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing through the audio monitors monitored by the sound engineer. He pushed open the heavy oak door of the restroom, shutting it to isolate himself from his interrogators. He believed the thick wooden barrier granted him absolute privacy, failing to understand the technological reach of the equipment attached to his chest. Inside the small, echoing confines of the bathroom, the cornered fugitive stood alone before a brightly lit mirror. He leaned over the porcelain sink, the immense pressure of the confronted evidence fracturing his internal monologue. The sensitive microphone captured every ragged breath and every disjointed mutter echoing off the ceramic tiles. He began speaking to his own reflection in a gravelly, private whisper, unaware that the sound engineer in the adjacent room heard every single syllable. He scolded himself for participating in the documentary, acknowledging the catastrophic error of his boundless vanity. Then, in a moment of pure unfiltered truth, the billionaire uttered a sequence of words that dismantled his entire existence. He asked his reflection what he had done, pausing for a fraction of a second before delivering the ultimate answer. He muttered the phrase, "Killed them all." Of course, this quiet, solitary confession resolved 33 years of agonizing mystery for the families of the victims. The predator had outmaneuvered police departments, evaded cold case detectives, and manipulated the highest courts in the country. Yet, in the end, his supreme arrogance and his own physical voice betrayed him, locking the final cage around his inescapable guilt. The wheels of justice moved with unprecedented speed in the days following the discovery of the bathroom audio recording. In March of the year, 2015 armed agents located the fugitive hiding inside a hotel room in New Orleans, Louisiana. Authorities apprehended the real estate tycoon just 24 hours before the final episode of the documentary broadcast to millions of viewers worldwide. They discovered him traveling with a loaded weapon, a latex mask, and a massive sum of cash, proving he intended to vanish into the shadows once again. The Los Angeles District Attorney filed formal charges, initiating a sprawling, complex legal battle that spanned several years. The resulting trial, delayed by global health events and endless defense motions, commenced in the year 2021. Prosecutors utilized the misspelled cadaver note and the chilling bathroom audio as the ultimate cornerstones of their case, presenting a flawless narrative of a calculated execution. They dismantled the defense theories, exposing the wealthy defendant as a ruthless manipulator who silenced anyone threatening his freedom. The jury required less than 8 hours of deliberation to return a verdict of absolute guilt for the targeted elimination of Susan Berman. A Los Angeles judge sentenced the elderly billionaire to a term of life in state prison, removing any possibility of parole. The conviction delivered a monumental, long-awaited victory for the loved ones of the brilliant Canyon writer. Following the Los Angeles verdict, authorities in New York indicted the disgraced heir for the 1982 disappearance of Kathleen McCormack. The legal system prepared to hold him accountable for the tragedy that initiated his decades-long campaign of deception. However, the slow, methodical pace of the courts collided with the frailty of the human body. In January of the year 2022, the 80-year-old prisoner passed away inside a secure medical facility while in state custody. His death triggered a highly controversial legal loophole within the California justice system regarding unfinished appeals. Because he died before his defense team could finalize their appellate paperwork, the court vacated his monumental conviction, wiping it from the official state ledger. Despite this infuriating bureaucratic technicality, the public record and the historical truth remain etched in stone. The billionaire spent his entire life believing his immense wealth made him an untouchable, ghost immune to the consequences of his horrific actions. In the end, it was not a massive investigative dragnet that brought down his empire, but rather his own supreme narcissism and a single catastrophic whisper. Sometimes the most damning confessions are captured by pure accident, much like a young man sitting in a parked car, unaware that his trusted friend has wired the vehicle with hidden police cameras to record a terrifying boast. Inside the cramped interior of a parked sedan, a young man leans back in the passenger seat and begins to outline a flawless crime. He speaks with a chilling calm, complaining to his friend sitting behind the steering wheel that it took his victim a full 30 minutes to lose consciousness. He describes the precise timing, the physical effort required, and the heavy burden of disposing of the remains over a local bridge. He smiles, convinced of his own untouchable intellect. He remains oblivious to the hidden lenses wired into the dashboard, feeding every chilling syllable right to the detectives listening just a few miles away. The trap is sprung. Neptune City sits on the coastal edge of New Jersey, a quiet suburban enclave where salt air blows in off the Atlantic Ocean and tight-knit neighborhoods border the Shark River Basin. The streets are lined with modest single-family homes, fading asphalt driveways, and tall oak trees that shed heavy layers of leaves as the coastal winters set in. In the year 2016, 19-year-old Sarah Stern called this coastal community home. Sarah possessed an endless reserve of creative energy, spending her afternoons sketching out vast landscapes and filling notebooks with intricate drawings. She shared a quiet house with her father, Michael, having lost her mother to illness years earlier. The loss left a permanent void in her life, but it also forged a profound, resilient empathy within her. She worked to create a bright future, enrolling in art classes and exploring local galleries along Main Street. Friends knew her as a beacon of warmth, a girl who kept a wide circle of companions from her high school days. She spent her weekends driving her dark gray 1994 Oldsmobile 88 along the beachside avenues, listening to music and dreaming of a life dedicated to digital media and television production. Her world was anchored in trust and loyalty, relying on the people she had known since childhood to navigate the challenges of young adulthood. Among her trusted companions was Liam McCasney, a lifelong friend she had known since grammar school. They navigated the same social circles, attended the same high school, and shared countless hours driving around the winding roads of Monmouth County. Liam presented himself as a fierce protector, someone Sarah could lean on during her darkest emotional moments. Because of this unwavering trust, Sarah shared a massive secret with him during the late autumn months of 2016. While cleaning out an old family property, she discovered a forgotten shoebox hidden deep inside a closet. Inside the box lay bundles of vintage banknotes, an old inheritance left behind by her late mother. The cash amounted to thousands of dollars, representing a vital lifeline that could fund her art education and secure her independence. Sarah confided exclusively in Liam about the shoebox, viewing the money as a sacred final gift from the woman who gave her life. She had no idea that her oldest friend viewed the vintage bills not as a tool for her future, but as an opportunity to enrich himself. Behind his mask of childhood loyalty, Liam began to view Sarah as an obstacle standing between him and a lucrative payout. He spent weeks calculating a path to take the inheritance, hiding his dark intentions behind a facade of casual weekend hangouts. The Route 35 bridge arches high above the Shark River, serving as a critical concrete artery connecting Neptune City to the neighboring borough of Belmar. The structure spans hundreds of feet across the dark freezing waters, flanked by a narrow pedestrian walkway and illuminated by the dull amber glow of sodium streetlights. At 2:45 in the morning on December 3, 2016, a routine police patrol noticed a dark gray 1994 Oldsmobile 88 stopped dead in the southbound lane of the bridge. The driver's side door hung wide open, exposing the empty interior to the freezing coastal wind. Detectives approached the vehicle, noting that the keys remained resting in the ignition. The engine was silent, but the sudden absence of the driver cast an immediate shadow of dread over the scene. Officers shined high-powered flashlights down into the churning river below, searching the pitch black water for any sign of movement. The vehicle belonged to Sarah Stern, who had vanished without a trace into the frigid December night. Local authorities initiated a massive maritime search, deploying Coast Guard helicopters and dive teams to scour the freezing currents of the Shark River Basin. The physical evidence pointed toward a tragic leap into the freezing waters, a narrative that the local police department began to piece together with a rapid pace. As dawn broke and the search intensified, Liam McCaskey stepped into the role of the devastated best friend. He joined the organized community search parties, distributing missing person flyers across storefront windows in downtown Belmar and Neptune City. When local news stations arrived to cover the mysterious disappearance, Liam positioned himself in front of the television cameras. He spoke with a somber tone, expressing concern for Sarah and suggesting to reporters that she had been struggling with personal issues. The local police department focused solely on the placement of the abandoned vehicle, allowing a dangerous assumption to guide their early protocols. Investigators classified the incident as a probable jump, treating the situation as a recovery mission rather than a complex criminal inquiry. This rigid adherence to standard missing person protocols created a massive blind spot, allowing crucial days to slip by without a deeper examination of Sarah's inner circle. Liam exploited this systemic vulnerability. Feeding the tragic narrative to anyone who would listen, he attended a community vigil held at the local beach, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sarah's grieving father. He offered quiet words of comfort while knowing exactly what fate had befallen his lifelong friend. The community mourned an apparent tragedy, leaving a predator to walk freely among them without a single shadow of suspicion cast in his direction. The first weeks of December 2016 brought punishing winter storms to the New Jersey coastline. The Monmouth County Maritime Unit spent endless hours mapping the tidal currents of the Shark River Basin. Dive teams plunged into the 30-degree waters beneath the Route 35 bridge, sweeping the muddy riverbed for any trace of 19-year-old Sarah Stern. The physical search yielded absolute silence. Despite the lack of a body, the local precinct remained anchored to their initial theory. Investigators treated the abandoned Oldsmobile as a definitive sign of a tragic self-inflicted end. This rigid adherence to the self-harm hypothesis created a massive procedural dead end. Detectives failed to secure the Stern residence as a potential site of foul play. They did not process the abandoned vehicle for latent fingerprints or hidden forensic markers. Officers viewed the case through the narrow lens of a mental health crisis, pausing any criminal inquiry. The administrative delay provided a crucial buffer for the true perpetrator to cover his tracks. The tragic narrative insulated Liam McCaskey from any official scrutiny. He walked free through the community, hiding behind his fabricated grief. While authorities dragged the dark coastal waters, Liam executed the secondary phase of his plan with chilling precision. He maintained direct contact with Sarah S., Father Michael Stern, visiting the family home under the guise of offering emotional support. The residence sat quiet and still filled with Sarah's untouched artwork and lingering memories. Liam sat on the living room sofa, watching a devastated father weep for a daughter who would never return. He used these intimate visits to monitor the ongoing police investigation from the inside. The proximity allowed him to gauge the precise details the detectives knew and what they suspected. Beyond gathering intelligence, Liam used his access to search the property for the remaining vintage banknotes. He mapped out the hiding spots inside the house while Michael slept or spoke with neighbors. This psychological manipulation represented a profound layer of cruelty, exploiting a grieving parent to secure stolen wealth. The local community continued to organize candlelit vigils along the freezing beach. Liam attended these gatherings, bowing his head in false reverence as speakers honored his lifelong friend. He believed he had engineered a flawless deception, confident that the cold waters of the Shark River had washed away his guilt. The entire month of December passed with the official investigation frozen in place. The stagnant investigation required an external force to shatter the false narrative. That force materialized in late January 2017 in the form of a young filmmaker named Anthony Curry. Anthony shared a social circle with Liam, often discussing creative projects and amateur film scripts. Weeks before Sarah vanished during the Thanksgiving holiday, Liam had approached Anthony with a detailed concept for an upcoming movie. The pitch centered on a protagonist who suffocated a female friend to steal a hidden cache of money. Liam described the exact mechanics of the act, detailing how the fictional perpetrator would dispose of the body by throwing it over a local bridge. At the time, Anthony viewed the conversation as nothing more than an ambitious brainstorm for a cinematic thriller. He dismissed the grim details, assuming Liam simply wanted to craft a gritty crime drama. However, as the news of the abandoned vehicle dominated the local television broadcasts, a deep sense of dread washed over the young filmmaker. The specific location of the Oldsmobile on the Route 35 bridge mirrored the exact climax of the fictional script. Anthony spent weeks agonizing over the chilling similarities, pacing the floors of his apartment. He realized the movie pitch was not a work of fiction, but a premeditated blueprint for reality. The horrifying weight of this truth left him with a desperate choice to make. Carrying the weight of this horrifying realization, Anthony walked into the Monmouth County prosecutor's office. He sat inside a sterile, windowless interview room, surrounded by pale cinder block walls and a single metal table. Detectives listened in stunned silence as the filmmaker recounted the Thanksgiving conversation word for word. The detailed correlation between the alleged movie script and the physical reality of the abandoned car forced a massive shift in police protocol. The criminal investigation ignited, shifting the focus away from the tragic self-harm theory. Authorities recognized that they could not arrest a suspect based on a third-party conversation about a movie script. The legal framework required concrete, undeniable proof of malicious intent to secure a warrant. Prosecutors faced a severe jurisdictional hurdle, needing to authorize covert surveillance without tipping off their prime target. They formulated a high-stakes sting operation, asking Anthony to engage Liam in another conversation about the event. The plan required Anthony to wear a concealed recording device and draw a direct admission from a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire police force. The filmmaker agreed, transforming himself into a civilian operative for the county detectives. The trap required meticulous planning to ensure the audio capture would hold up against any defense attorney in a court of law. Investigators spent days navigating rigid bureaucratic protocols to secure the necessary wiretap authorizations. The technical preparations for the sting operation unfolded during the final week of January 2017. Detectives requisitioned a covert surveillance vehicle, pulling a standard dark sedan into the secure garage of the county precinct. Technicians dismantled the dashboard, embedding high-definition microscopic lenses into the plastic air vents. They wired specialized audio receivers deep into the upholstery, ensuring every whisper within the cabin would transmit to a nearby command post. The physical geography of the meetup was selected to maximize control and limit ambient noise. Anthony parked the wired sedan in a quiet, sprawling commercial parking lot in the neighboring town of Bradley Beach. The asphalt lot sat empty, bordered by a towering grocery store on one side and a silent residential street on the other. Undercover units positioned themselves in unmarked vans at the perimeter, keeping a strict distance to avoid spooking the target. The cold winter air kept the surrounding streets desolate, providing an isolated stage for the confrontation. Anthony sat behind the steering wheel, his hands gripping the leather as he waited for his old acquaintance to arrive. The heavy metallic click of the passenger door unlocking signaled the beginning of the final act. Liam slid into the passenger seat, unaware that he had just stepped into an invisible cage. He greeted Anthony with a relaxed smile, radiating the arrogant confidence of a predator who believed he had won. Inside the enclosed cabin of the dark sedan, the ambient temperature remained freezing as the engine idled. Anthony steered the conversation toward the missing girl, asking Liam for updates on the police investigation. Liam leaned back against the passenger headrest. The facade of the grieving friend shattered in an instant. He adopted a tone of supreme arrogance, bragging about his own perceived intellect. He detailed the exact chronological steps he took on the afternoon of December 2nd. He explained how he visited the house in Neptune City, knowing the vintage banknotes sat hidden in a closet. He cornered his lifelong friend in the quiet space of her own living room. The physical struggle commenced without warning. Liam described the exact mechanics of the fatal assault. He complained, using a casual tone, that it took a full 30 minutes to restrict her airway and force her to pass away. He watched a digital timer on his cellular telephone, timing the terrible ordeal as he extinguished her future. The digital audio recorders captured the horrifying mechanical details of the aftermath. Leaving the living room behind, Liam dragged the remains toward the dark gray Oldsmobile 88. He realized the physical burden of moving the deceased required assistance. He revealed to Anthony that he contacted his roommate, Preston Taylor, promising a share of the stolen cash in exchange for physical labor. The two men coordinated the cover-up under the cloak of darkness. They loaded the 19-year-old girl into the passenger seat of her own vehicle. Preston followed close behind in a separate car as Liam drove the Oldsmobile toward the Route 35 bridge. Upon reaching the apex of the concrete structure, the men stopped the engine and left the keys in the ignition. They hoisted the remains over the metal railing, letting gravity plunge their lifelong friend into the freezing Shark River. Liam laughed through the vehicle speakers, mocking the local police department for believing the false narrative. He boasted that he walked away with $10,000 in vintage bills. He viewed the entire fatal act as a successful financial transaction. Detectives listened from their unmarked vans parked at the perimeter of the asphalt lot. The audio receivers transmitted an undeniable, vivid timeline straight from the mouth of the perpetrator. The boastful statements provided the exact legal foundation the Monmouth County prosecutor required. Liam exited the wired sedan, unaware that he had just sealed his own fate. He walked back out into the freezing January air, planning to spend his stolen wealth. Armed tactical units moved in mere hours later. They executed simultaneous apprehension warrants across the coastal community. Officers intercepted Liam, placing him in heavy steel restraints before he could access the stolen funds. Detectives apprehended Preston Taylor at the exact same time, breaking the accomplice under the crushing weight of the audio evidence. The arrogant predator lost control of the narrative in a matter of seconds. The Monmouth County Courthouse stands as a towering structure of brick and glass in the heart of Freehold, New Jersey. In the year 2019, Liam McCaskey faced a jury of his peers within those heavy oak-paneled walls. Prosecutors did not need to rely on circumstantial theories or shifting witness memories. They played the pristine audio recordings from the undercover sting operation directly to the silent courtroom. The jury listened to the chilling sound of a young man complaining about the 30 minutes it took to end a life. The defense attempted to frame the recording as an audition tape for an upcoming film role. The jury rejected this absurd legal defense without hesitation. The undeniable arrogance captured on the wire stripped away any illusion of innocence. Preston Taylor accepted a plea agreement. Testifying against his former roommate and detailing the exact mechanics of the bridge disposal, the jury delivered a definitive verdict of guilty on all counts, including first-degree robbery and the ultimate fatal act. The verdict provided a profound sense of moral justice for a grieving coastal community. The justice system finally course-corrected the initial investigative failures. The presiding judge addressed the convicted predator with unwavering sternness. The court recognized the profound psychological cruelty inflicted upon the victim and her surviving father. The judge handed down a sentence of life in state prison without the possibility of parole. Liam McCaskey traded a stolen shoebox of vintage banknotes for a permanent cage of concrete and steel. He remains locked away from society, trapped by his own inability to resist bragging about a horrific betrayal. Michael Stern found a small measure of peace. Knowing the predator who sat on his living room sofa would never breathe free air again, Sarah Stern lost her bright future, but her memory remains a testament to warmth and creative passion within Neptune City. The meticulous deployment of hidden audio surveillance proved that absolute arrogance often engineers its own destruction. Yet, the trap of an undercover wire is not the only method detectives use to dismantle a deceptive facade. Sometimes, a predator gives themselves away, not through a boastful confession, but through the microscopic linguistic choices they make during an emergency telephone call. We turn now to our next case where a frantic plea for help contained a hidden, chilling truth. In the end, it was not a lack of evidence that betrayed these individuals, but the weight of their own vanity. They wore the masks of neighbors, yet their need for recognition proved stronger than their survival instinct. True evil eventually whispers its own condemnation. Thank you for joining us. For more cases where the masks slipped, click the video on your screen now.